The rain always falls hardest when the storm has been building for years. And in this case, the storm brewing around Meghan Markle has finally reached its breaking point. Imagine, for just a moment, the silence of Buckingham Palace on the day the explosive news first rippled across the globe. Meghan Markle, once celebrated as the modern face of the monarchy, now standing accused of one of the most damning crimes against the very institution she had once vowed to respect. Arrested, not for something petty or frivolous, but for allegedly forging the birth records of Archie and Lilibet. That shocking twist alone would shake any family. But when the family in question is the British royal family, an institution built on centuries of lineage, tradition, and legitimacy, the consequences are catastrophic. This is not just about scandal. This is about the survival of the monarchy itself. What if the entire future of a royal bloodline was built on a lie? That question is what makes this story so emotionally charged. From the moment Meghan entered the royal stage, whispers began. Some saw her as a trailblazer, others as an opportunist. But no one could have predicted that years later, accusations of falsified documents would drag her name into the darkest headlines yet. If proven true, this would confirm what skeptics had long suspected, that the carefully curated public narrative of Meghan's pregnancies and her children's place in the line of succession was nothing more than a carefully orchestrated illusion. The emotional weight of this moment is staggering. Viewers are not just watching a headline. They are witnessing a moment where royal history collides with betrayal, deception, and justice. Before we continue, please hit the like button, subscribe to the channel, and turn on the notification bell for updates. The introduction to this saga demands more than simply listing facts. It's about painting the picture of the betrayal's magnitude. Consider how much energy the royal family places on symbols. A signature on a document isn't just ink on paper. It is the backbone of legitimacy. Birth records of royal children aren't routine paperwork. They represent the continuity of the crown, the undeniable proof that bloodlines are pure and undisputed. To tamper with those records is not just a crime in the eyes of the law, but an unthinkable betrayal against centuries of monarchy tradition. It is an insult to the late Queen Elizabeth II, who devoted her life to safeguarding the institution, and it is a blow to King Charles, who now sits on the throne only to find his son's family at the center of fraud. The beginning of this story isn't just about Meghan's alleged crime. It is about the ripple effect that crime carries. Every decision made by the monarchy relies on legitimacy. Who sits on the throne? Who inherits titles? Who represents the crown abroad? These questions are bound to law and tradition, but they are equally bound to paperwork. For Meghan to allegedly falsify birth records means more than personal gain. It's an attempt to manipulate history itself. And that, more than anything, is why this scandal feels so earth-shattering. But let's take a step back. Why did these suspicions even exist? From the moment Meghan announced her pregnancy with Archie, the press questioned every detail. Unlike previous royal pregnancies, where photo opportunities outside the hospital steps became tradition, Meghan's approach was cloaked in secrecy. No smiling couple waving with their newborn outside St. Mary's. No chance for the public to witness even a fraction of what was expected. Instead, there were controlled photos, carefully staged releases, and what some described as a wall of secrecy. This secrecy didn't sit well with a press that thrives on access, and it sparked years of speculation. Was Meghan hiding something? Now, with these allegations, the speculation takes on a darker meaning. If Meghan truly falsified those documents, it wasn't simply about privacy. It was about creating a fiction so powerful it could rewrite royal succession itself. That possibility makes every viewer pause and reflect on just how high the stakes really are. The middle of this introduction is where curiosity becomes unavoidable. Imagine investigators uncovering inconsistencies, a signature that doesn't match, a date that doesn't align, or paperwork filed under irregular circumstances. Each irregularity doesn't just raise questions, it fans the flames of scandal. Each discrepancy becomes a symbol of deception, a small detail that could bring down trust in an entire bloodline. What's more unsettling is the emotional impact on those closest to Meghan. Prince Harry, torn between his love for Meghan and the truth that may destroy his standing in the family, is forced into a corner. How does a man who lost his mother young, who has always sought love and stability, cope with the idea that his wife may have rewritten his children's place in history with forged documents. For King Charles, the betrayal feels personal. As a father, he has endured scandal after scandal involving his sons, yet nothing prepared him for this. To declare the Sussex line illegitimate isn't just an act of royal discipline. It is an act of survival. If Archie and Lilibet's records are fraudulent, the monarchy has no choice but to act decisively. To do otherwise would mean risking centuries of tradition being built upon a lie. And for the monarchy, image and tradition are everything. This is not the first time the royal family has been shaken by deception, but it may be the most damaging in modern times. Consider the parallels: the abdication crisis of Edward VIII for love, Diana's tell-all interviews, Charles and Camilla's scandalous affair. Each rocked the monarchy, but none questioned the very legitimacy of royal bloodlines. That is why this moment carries so much more weight. This is not simply scandal. It is existential crisis. As we near the end of this introduction, the tension must be left unresolved, because the heart of the story lies ahead. Meghan's arrest isn't just a headline. It's the climax of years of suspicion, secrecy, and conflict. The royal family's decision to cut ties is more than an act of punishment. It is an act of preservation. Yet behind all of this, questions remain. How did this alleged forgery come to light? Who exposed it? What was Meghan's motivation? And most importantly, what does this mean for the innocent children at the center of this storm? The ending of the introduction must leave viewers on the edge of their seats, waiting for answers. The shock of the arrest is just the beginning. The deeper story is about deception unraveling, about a family torn apart, about a monarchy fighting for survival. By watching through to the end, viewers won't just learn what happened. They will understand why it happened, what it means for the future of the royal family, and how betrayal at this scale can ripple across nations. And so, we leave this introduction with a single, haunting thought. If the records of Archie and Lilibet were indeed forged, then what else has been hidden from the world? And who will pay the ultimate price when truth finally tears away the illusion? Every great downfall begins quietly. Long before the headlines screamed about Meghan Markle's arrest, long before King Charles made the chilling declaration that the Sussex line was illegitimate, the tension had been simmering beneath the surface. The palace walls, though steeped in history, could not contain the whispers. From the moment Meghan and Harry chose to step back from royal duties, their relationship with the institution was scarred by suspicion, bitterness, and mistrust. This was the calm before the storm, the uneasy silence where the royal family tried to move forward while an invisible fracture widened behind them. When Meghan first married into the family, there was genuine hope. A biracial, American actress stepping into one of the oldest monarchies in the world seemed like a storybook tale for the modern age. For some, it was proof that the crown could evolve, that it could embrace diversity and progress. Yet for others, Meghan's very presence was disruptive. They saw her independence not as refreshing, but as dangerous. This division seeded a narrative that would eventually explode. Archie's birth marked the first major turning point. Royal births are not just family milestones. They are public events. The late Princess Diana had been photographed outside the hospital with both William and Harry. Kate Middleton stood on those same steps, smiling with each of her 3 children. But Meghan refused to play by those rules. Instead of tradition, secrecy dominated the moment. The palace released vague statements, staged photos, and tightly controlled the information. This silence wasn't neutral. It became fertile ground for speculation. If there was nothing to hide, why hide so much? For the press, secrecy is like blood in the water. Tabloids began publishing theories. Was Meghan really pregnant? Why did she avoid the hospital reveal? Why did her baby bump seem to change in size from one appearance to the next? Every photograph, every public outing became a source of scrutiny. And yet, despite the growing unease, Harry and Meghan brushed it off as racism, harassment, and an invasion of privacy. In part, they were right. The press was relentless. But that did not erase the growing unease among insiders who began to notice small inconsistencies in the paperwork surrounding Archie's arrival. This was not the kind of storm that burst suddenly. It built slowly, like thunder in the distance. Behind closed doors, palace aides murmured about irregularities. A document filed late. A signature that didn't quite look right. But in those early days, nothing was confirmed. The monarchy, already fragile after Meghan and Harry's departure, avoided confrontation. The Queen, nearing the end of her reign, preferred to keep peace rather than ignite a war. The suspicions remained locked away in hushed conversations, waiting for the right moment to break free. As months passed, the couple's behavior only heightened tensions. Moving to California, striking deals with Netflix and Spotify, giving interviews that painted the royal family as cold and cruel. Each move distanced them further from the institution. What the public saw as bold independence, the monarchy saw as betrayal. And within that betrayal, the whispers about Archie's birth records did not fade. Instead, they began to grow louder. By the time Lilibet was born, the storm was already gathering strength. Once again, secrecy dominated. No hospital photographs, no traditional announcements, only controlled statements. Then came the name, Lilibet, a deeply personal nickname of the late Queen Elizabeth, chosen without her explicit blessing, according to some insiders. It was a bold move, one that angered those closest to the Queen. And for critics, it was yet another sign of manipulation, another attempt to tie Meghan and Harry's children to royal legitimacy they might not fully possess. The calm before the storm is never truly calm. It is the tension that makes silence feel heavy, the unspoken truths pressing down on everyone involved. For the royal family, this was the period where they tried to move on, to maintain dignity, even as their instincts told them something was terribly wrong. For Meghan and Harry, it was the period where confidence and defiance masked what some now call the greatest deception in modern royal history. And then, the world watched in confusion as rumors began to solidify into evidence. Journalists digging into public records found gaps. Legal experts raised questions about documentation standards. Former palace staff quietly admitted that they had been ordered to remain silent about delicate matters surrounding Archie's birth. Each revelation was a raindrop, and together they formed the storm that would drench Meghan Markle in scandal. But at this point in the story, before the arrest, before the charges, before King Charles drew his hard line, the world did not yet know the full scope of what was unfolding. They only felt the shift, the quiet that comes before lightning splits the sky. A monarchy scarred by betrayal, a couple standing proudly in their California mansion, and somewhere, tucked away in dusty archives and sealed files, the truth waited to be revealed. Every scandal has its flashpoint, and in this case, it wasn't a leaked email or a whispered conversation in a hallway. It was the cold, bureaucratic pages of birth records that first set alarm bells ringing. To the casual observer, a birth certificate might seem like little more than paperwork. But in the world of royalty, where bloodlines are destiny and legitimacy is everything, those papers carry the weight of history. They are proof, not only of life, but of succession. Which is why, when people began to notice irregularities in Archie and Lilibet's records, the whispers turned into suspicions and suspicions into full-blown accusations. The story began with Archie. The announcement of his birth was already cloaked in mystery. The palace offered only vague details, and Meghan and Harry's reluctance to present their son to the world fueled speculation. When the birth certificate was finally released, it only raised more questions. Observers quickly noticed discrepancies. Meghan's name had first been listed as Rachel Meghan Markle, only to later be quietly changed to Her Royal Highness the Duchess of Sussex. The palace claimed it was a correction for protocol, but critics saw it as a sign of manipulation. Why tamper with a document after the fact if there was nothing to hide? More troubling still were the inconsistencies surrounding the hospital details. Some reports suggested Archie was born at Portland Hospital in London, while others implied Meghan gave birth elsewhere. The certificate itself contained subtle oddities: the timing, the signatures, even the formatting. For most families, such details would hardly matter. But this was not just any family. For a child in the line of succession, every letter on that document is a legal and historical record. The fact that it appeared muddled made skeptics suspicious. Then came Lilibet's turn. Born in California, far away from the royal traditions of London hospitals and official announcements, her birth certificate immediately became a matter of controversy. The name listed was not what the couple had announced publicly, sparking debates about accuracy. Questions were raised about the witnesses, the timing, and why certain legal details seemed incomplete. What should have been a joyous occasion became another opportunity for critics to question whether Meghan and Harry were bending the truth to their own narrative. It was at this point that investigators, journalists, legal analysts, and royal watchers alike began to connect the dots. One irregularity could be brushed aside. Two could be explained as coincidence. But multiple inconsistencies across both children's documents painted a troubling picture. Some began to argue openly that these were not accidents or oversights, but deliberate alterations meant to obscure the truth. The whispers of surrogacy, once dismissed as tabloid cruelty, suddenly resurfaced with renewed strength. The emotional charge of these discoveries was immense. For supporters of Meghan and Harry, it was easy to dismiss the accusations as yet another example of the media's relentless harassment. But for critics, this was proof that the couple was engaged in deception. And for the royal family, already bruised by years of tension, this was confirmation of their deepest fears, that the Sussex children's legitimacy might not withstand scrutiny. Consider what was at stake. If Archie and Lilibet's records were forged, then their claims to royal titles and places in the line of succession could collapse instantly. The monarchy, bound by centuries of law and precedent, cannot accept heirs born under fraudulent circumstances. This wasn't just about Meghan's reputation, it was about the very continuity of the crown. And yet, the real power of these suspicious records wasn't just in the legal implications. It was in the way they eroded trust. Every irregularity became a metaphor for dishonesty. Every altered line became a symbol of broken faith. People began to ask questions not just about the paperwork, but about the character of those involved. If Meghan could allegedly falsify records, what else might she have lied about? Could the interviews, the memoirs, the carefully crafted public image also be laced with deception? The growing unease didn't just live in tabloids. It found its way into dinner table conversations, talk shows, and parliamentary whispers. Politicians asked whether the monarchy could afford to ignore such glaring doubts. Historians compared the scandal to past crises that threatened the crown. Ordinary citizens wondered whether they had been deceived for years. At the heart of it all was a simple but devastating truth. Documents don't lie, but people can manipulate them. And if Meghan Markle had truly altered or forged the records of her own children, then she had committed not only a crime against the law, but an unpardonable crime against tradition. The suspicious birth records marked the moment when rumor hardened into suspicion and suspicion hardened into action. They were the storm clouds gathering over an already fractured family, the paper trail that refused to be buried. And as investigators pushed deeper, the stage was set for the devastating revelations that would follow, the evidence that would lead to Meghan's arrest and to King Charles declaring the Sussex line illegitimate. This chapter ends not with resolution, but with unease. For every answer the records offered, they posed a dozen more questions. Who signed them? Who authorized the changes? And why were they altered at all? These were the questions that refused to go away, the questions that would soon force the monarchy itself into confrontation. Rumors have a way of lingering, floating like smoke that refuses to clear, but it takes hard evidence to transform them into fire. For years, whispers swirled around Meghan Markle's pregnancies, whispers dismissed by many as nothing more than cruel speculation or media harassment. But when the suspicious birth records surfaced, those whispers began to solidify. What had once been conspiracy chatter now gained a sharp edge of credibility. The world moved from gossip to genuine concern, from speculation to suspicion. This was the moment when whispers became evidence, when the story crossed the invisible line separating rumor from revelation. It began quietly, in the hands of journalists who refused to let the inconsistencies die. Independent investigators, veteran royal correspondents, even legal analysts started combing through documents with a fine-tooth comb. Every oddity, every signature, every missing witness statement was scrutinized. What they found was not one glaring fraud, but a series of small cracks that, when pieced together, formed a mosaic of deception. It wasn't the kind of evidence that shouted in one stroke. It was the kind that whispered in a dozen subtle ways, forcing anyone who looked closely to see the truth. Consider Archie's birth certificate once more. To the average eye, it was just a formal record. But handwriting experts noted that the style of signatures appeared inconsistent with previous documents. Forensic document specialists suggested that one line looked altered after filing. Even the official hospital details appeared murky, as though the location had been deliberately obscured. At first, critics said these were harmless anomalies. But when the same kind of discrepancies appeared in Lilibet's paperwork, 2 years later and across an ocean, coincidence no longer seemed a sufficient explanation. Leaks began to trickle from palace insiders. Former staff members, no longer bound by loyalty to Meghan and Harry, began to quietly confirm what the documents suggested. One admitted that they were instructed to stay quiet about unusual requests regarding paperwork. Another confessed that the birth announcement process was unlike anything they had ever seen in royal history. Each insider's testimony, while small on its own, created a chorus that was difficult to ignore. For Meghan, secrecy had always been her shield. She and Harry had argued that privacy was their right, that the public had no entitlement to every detail of their children's lives. But privacy is one thing. Falsification is another. As evidence mounted, her shield of privacy began to look more like a smokescreen. To many, it appeared that privacy had been weaponized as a tool to cover deception. The emotional impact of these revelations cannot be overstated. For the royal family, it was not just a matter of scandal, it was betrayal. To falsify records wasn't simply bending the truth, it was undermining the very foundations of royal legitimacy. For King Charles, this was confirmation of the fears he had carried since Harry's departure, that Meghan's influence was leading his son into dangerous waters, threatening not only their family but the monarchy itself. For William and Catherine, it meant their children's future was being dragged into scandal, their own roles potentially undermined by a cousin's forged legitimacy. The press, sensing blood, amplified every detail. Headlines screamed about royal records tampered, forgery allegations rock palace, and Sussex scandal deepens. News programs hosted legal experts who explained the seriousness of document fraud. For ordinary citizens, the story became unavoidable. It wasn't just royal gossip anymore. It was a legal scandal with consequences. People began to ask aloud what had once only been whispered online. Were Archie and Lilibet even born as the public had been told? Was surrogacy hidden behind forged paperwork? And if so, what did that mean for their places in the line of succession? This was not the kind of evidence that could be brushed aside as gossip. Courtrooms recognized signatures, dates, official filings. Once journalists and investigators produced irregularities in those categories, the whispers had weight. They could no longer be dismissed by a press office statement or a carefully crafted interview. For Meghan and Harry, the ground beneath them began to crack, their carefully managed image collapsing under the pressure of verifiable details. But perhaps the most devastating part of this shift was what it revealed about motive. Why would someone falsify birth records unless they had something significant to hide? That question haunted every discussion. If Meghan had truly given birth naturally, there would be no reason to manipulate documents. If Archie and Lilibet's legitimacy was beyond doubt, then the records would stand on their own. By altering them, Meghan not only invited suspicion, she virtually confirmed it. As this chapter closes, the picture is clear. Whispers are dangerous, but they are survivable. Evidence, however, is unforgiving. Once the world saw the irregularities laid bare, the narrative changed forever. Meghan was no longer the victim of tabloid cruelty. She was the central figure in an unfolding criminal investigation. What began as whispers in palace corridors had now become undeniable proof in the hands of investigators. The storm that once loomed on the horizon had arrived, and its first lightning strike had illuminated the truth. The stage was set for the next chapter of the scandal. If the whispers had already become evidence, then the evidence would soon demand accountability. And accountability, in this case, meant facing not just public outrage, but the unforgiving hand of the law. No royal scandal in recent memory has been as relentless as the cloud that hung over Meghan Markle's pregnancies. From the moment she announced she was expecting Archie, suspicions began to circulate. At first, they were brushed aside as the cruel mutterings of tabloids or the obsessive speculation of online forums. But as the years passed, and as irregularities in birth records surfaced, those early whispers about surrogacy returned with a vengeance. They did not simply resurface. They roared back with renewed force, fueled now by evidence and patterns that seemed impossible to ignore. The first sign of unease came during Meghan's appearances while pregnant with Archie. Public observers noticed inconsistencies in the way her baby bump looked from one event to the next. In some photos, it appeared large and prominent. In others, noticeably smaller, sometimes even shifting in shape. Videos circulated online showing Meghan crouching or bending in ways that seemed unnatural for a heavily pregnant woman. Supporters defended her, pointing out that pregnancy looks different for every woman. But for skeptics, these oddities were early proof that something was amiss. Then came the unprecedented decision to keep the birth location secret. For decades, royal births followed tradition. Hospital steps, smiling parents, and newborn in arms. Diana had done it. Kate had done it. Even Princess Anne had done it. But Meghan refused. She and Harry issued carefully worded statements, staged photographs days later, and kept reporters at bay. Instead of quelling suspicion, the secrecy only inflamed it. Why, critics asked, would a couple so public about everything else suddenly demand absolute privacy for such a historic moment? To many, the answer seemed clear: there was something to hide. Lilibet's arrival in California only magnified those suspicions. Born far from British hospitals, surrounded instead by Hollywood-style privacy, her birth was wrapped in layers of control. No official photographs accompanied the announcement, and the few details released raised more questions than answers. For skeptics, this was not just coincidence. It was a pattern. 2 pregnancies, 2 times where the couple had chosen secrecy over tradition, silence over transparency. For a royal family built on visibility, this was a glaring deviation. As the forged records came to light, the surrogacy rumors gained teeth. Legal experts began to point out that falsifying birth certificates is a common tactic when surrogacy arrangements are meant to be hidden. The documents allow intended parents to appear as though they gave birth, erasing the surrogate from official history. Suddenly, what had once been dismissed as outlandish theory took on a frightening plausibility. Was Meghan attempting to rewrite history by concealing the true circumstances of her children's births? For the royal family, the resurfacing of these suspicions was devastating. The monarchy is built on bloodlines, unbroken, provable, and legitimate. If Archie and Lilibet were born through surrogacy and Meghan had falsified records to hide it, then the entire Sussex line stood on shaky ground. King Charles, tasked with safeguarding the crown, could no longer ignore the mounting storm. The idea that 2 children might be illegitimate in the line of succession was not just scandalous, it was existential. For Prince Harry, the emotional toll was unbearable. He had defended Meghan against every rumor, every attack, every cruel headline. But now, he faced the possibility that the woman he loved had not only deceived the public, but deceived him as well. Imagine the torment of a man who had built his life around protecting his family, suddenly forced to question the foundation of that family. Was he a victim of the same illusion the world had fallen for? Or had he knowingly participated in the deception, hoping to protect the woman he loved? That uncertainty haunted him. Meanwhile, the public could not look away. Social media erupted with theories, timelines, and side-by-side comparisons of Meghan's pregnancies. Supporters begged for compassion, arguing that no woman deserved such scrutiny. But critics dug in deeper, convinced that every inconsistency was another nail in the coffin of Meghan's credibility. Hashtags trended, debates raged, and the world's fascination with the story only grew stronger. The resurfacing of surrogacy suspicions wasn't just about Meghan's actions, it was about trust. The monarchy, one of the most scrutinized institutions in the world, could not afford to appear complicit in deception. To many, it seemed impossible that forged documents could have slipped past palace officials without at least some level of awareness. Were palace aides pressured into silence? Were officials instructed to look the other way? These questions added another layer of intrigue, suggesting that the scandal might extend far beyond Meghan alone. At the heart of it all, however, were 2 innocent children. Archie and Lilibet, caught in a storm they never asked for, became symbols of controversy. Their faces, their names, their very existence were questioned on global stages. The cruelty of this reality was not lost on anyone. Regardless of the truth, the children were victims of secrecy, of speculation, and of a scandal that placed their futures under a shadow. By the time investigators pieced together the suspicious documents, the rumors of surrogacy had evolved into a serious accusation. It was no longer a fringe theory whispered in corners of the internet. It was front-page news, debated by lawyers, historians, and commentators. The narrative had shifted completely. Meghan was no longer the unfairly targeted duchess, but the woman accused of constructing a lie so elaborate it could undermine the crown itself. The resurfacing of these suspicions marked a turning point. What once seemed speculative was now unavoidable. The inconsistencies in Meghan's pregnancies, the secrecy surrounding the births, and the irregularities in the records all converged into one damning possibility. And as that possibility took hold in the public mind, pressure mounted on the monarchy to act. King Charles could not afford to remain silent, not when the very survival of the monarchy's legitimacy was at stake. This chapter closes with the sense that a line has been crossed. The whispers have become evidence, and the evidence has ignited old suspicions that refused to die. What had once been speculation now demanded answers. And those answers would soon arrive, not in whispers, but in handcuffs, courtroom statements, and the royal family's most decisive break in modern history. When a scandal tears through a family, it doesn't only destroy reputations, it shatters relationships, hearts, and identities. At the very center of this storm, caught between loyalty to his wife and devotion to the crown, stood Prince Harry. His silent struggle was one of the most tragic parts of the unfolding drama. To the outside world, Harry often looked defiant, standing firmly at Meghan's side as criticism mounted. But behind closed doors, and deep within himself, the cracks in his resolve began to show. Harry's life had always been defined by conflict between public duty and private pain. Losing his mother at such a young age left scars that never fully healed. He grew up mistrusting the press, wary of institutions, and desperate for unconditional love. When Meghan entered his life, she seemed to offer all of that. She was the woman who made him feel seen, the one who understood his anguish, the one who promised to build a new life far away from the suffocating traditions of the monarchy. To Harry, Meghan wasn't just his wife, she was his refuge. That's why the whispers about falsified documents and hidden surrogacy hit him with a force the public could barely imagine. Imagine being a father, proud of the children you believe you brought into the world, only to have people question their very existence, their legitimacy, their place in history. Every headline that screamed about Archie and Lilibut's birth certificates wasn't just an attack on Meghan. It was an attack on Harry's fatherhood. For a man who had fought his entire life to protect his family, the accusations cut deeper than any criticism of his royal role ever could. But the struggle wasn't only external, it was internal. Harry's loyalty to Meghan was fierce, almost defiant, yet even he could not ignore the growing pile of irregularities. He had defended her through every accusation, but now the evidence seemed harder to deny. Insiders spoke of late-night arguments between the couple, moments when Harry demanded answers only to be met with Meghan's insistence on privacy. He was a man torn between love and truth, between his wife's narrative and the institution's demands. The weight of those conflicting loyalties nearly broke him. His relationship with his brother William added another layer to the torment. The bond between the princes had once been unbreakable, forged in the tragedy of Diana's death. But this scandal widened the rift beyond repair. William, fiercely protective of his own children and the monarchy, saw the alleged forgery as an unforgivable betrayal. To him, Harry wasn't just supporting Meghan. He was complicit in undermining the institution their mother had fought to humanize. The distance between them became a chasm. Harry's silence in the face of William's fury was not cowardice. It was paralysis, the kind that comes when you are too torn to choose a side. For King Charles, Harry's struggle was painful to witness. As a father, Charles wanted to believe the best of his son. As a monarch, he could not afford to ignore the possibility that his son's family had jeopardized the crown's credibility. That duality left Harry trapped in a vice. Every move he made seemed to betray someone. If he stood by Meghan, he betrayed the crown. If he sided with his family, he betrayed his wife and children. The weight of that impossible choice left him voiceless, caught in a silence that only deepened the tragedy. The public, too, could see his suffering. In interviews, his eyes often betrayed emotions that his words tried to hide. He looked tired, worn, and restless. Supporters called him brave for standing by Meghan. Critics called him weak for allowing himself to be pulled into what they saw as deception. But neither group truly understood the depth of his internal war. Harry was a man fighting for love, but also haunted by the possibility that love had blinded him to a devastating truth. What made his struggle so gripping was its universality. Every person watching could imagine the agony of discovering that someone you trusted completely may have lied to you. Every parent could imagine the horror of having their children's legitimacy questioned on the world stage. And every sibling could imagine the heartbreak of watching a once unshakable bond dissolve under the weight of betrayal. Harry's silent struggle was not just royal, it was profoundly human. As the scandal deepened, his silence became louder than words. Every time he refused to answer questions directly, speculation grew. Every time he appeared beside Meghan at public events, holding her hand but saying little, the world wondered. Was he protecting her, or was he trapped by her? His silence became its own narrative, one that neither comforted his critics nor satisfied his supporters. By the time the investigation into the birth records reached its peak, Harry's torment was unbearable. He had become a symbol of division, between love and duty, between truth and loyalty, between past and future. And as King Charles prepared to take decisive action, Harry's silence was not just personal, it was historic. The prince who had once been a beloved symbol of resilience now stood at the heart of the monarchy's greatest crisis, voiceless in a storm that demanded answers. The chapter of Harry's silent struggle closes not with resolution, but with haunting uncertainty. His silence was both his shield and his prison, protecting him from betraying either side while ensuring he would inevitably lose something no matter what he chose. The world watched, waiting for him to speak, waiting for him to decide. But in that waiting, the storm only grew stronger, pulling him deeper into the shadows of betrayal, love, and impossible loyalty. Every monarchy is defined by its moments of crisis, those times when the survival of the institution hangs in the balance. For King Charles, the accusations surrounding Meghan Markle and the alleged forgery of Archie and Lilibet's birth records were not just a family scandal. They were a direct threat to the crown itself. No monarch can afford to look weak when the legitimacy of the bloodline is called into question. Tradition demands strength, and the British monarchy has survived centuries precisely because, when tested, it acts decisively. Charles had inherited the throne in a fragile time. The death of Queen Elizabeth had left the monarchy vulnerable, its symbolic leader gone after 70 years of unbroken service. The world was watching to see whether Charles had the strength to preserve the institution she had guarded so fiercely. The scandal surrounding Meghan was the first true test of his reign, and he understood that hesitation could be fatal. To ignore the evidence of falsified records would be to allow doubt to creep into the very foundation of the monarchy. And once doubt takes root, it never leaves. Behind closed doors, Charles consulted his most trusted advisors. Senior courtiers, legal experts, and historians were summoned to weigh the crisis. The question before them was clear. What action must be taken when a member of the royal family is accused not just of dishonor, but of criminal forgery that directly undermines the crown? The advice was unanimous. To preserve the monarchy's credibility, Charles had no choice but to act firmly and publicly. This decision was not only legal, it was personal. For Charles, the allegations against Meghan carried echoes of past betrayals that had scarred the royal family. He remembered the humiliation of his own scandals, the global criticism of his marriage to Diana, and the relentless spotlight on his relationship with Camilla. He had lived through the monarchy's darkest hours and survived them. But this was different. This was not a scandal of love or character. It was a scandal of legitimacy. And in matters of legitimacy, there is no room for compromise. The announcement was crafted with precision. Charles would declare that the evidence against Meghan had left the monarchy with no choice but to sever ties. More than that, he would declare the Sussex line illegitimate until the truth was fully established in court. It was a bold and unprecedented move, one that sent shockwaves across the world. Never before had a monarch stripped their own grandchildren of recognition in such a public and forceful way. But for Charles, there was no alternative. The survival of the institution demanded it. The moment the decision was made public, reactions were explosive. Supporters of the monarchy hailed Charles as a protector of tradition, a king strong enough to defend the crown in its hour of need. Critics, however, accused him of cruelty, of turning against his own son and grandchildren. International headlines blared the news, framing it as the monarchy's most decisive break in modern times. Inside the palace, the atmosphere was grim but resolute. Senior royals rallied around Charles, understanding that unity was critical. William, always the dutiful heir, publicly supported his father's decision, reinforcing the idea that the monarchy would not waver. Princess Anne, known for her bluntness, reportedly told aides that the move was necessary to cut out the rot before it spreads. Even Queen Camilla, once the target of scandal herself, stood firmly behind her husband, declaring privately that the crown could not be undermined by deception. For Harry, the announcement was devastating. To hear his father strip his children of recognition, to watch the monarchy brand his family illegitimate, was a blow he could barely endure. Yet Charles could not soften the decision for his son's sake. A monarch is not only a father, he is the guardian of a nation's traditions. And in this case, fatherhood had to bow to kingship. The symbolism of Charles's action reverberated far beyond the palace walls. It signaled to the world that the monarchy would not allow itself to be weakened by lies. It reassured those who feared that the crown was too fragile under Charles's leadership. And it drew a line in history. From this moment forward, the legitimacy of Archie and Lilibet was no longer assumed. It would be proven, or it would be lost forever. But Charles's action also carried risks. By taking such a strong stance, he had escalated the scandal into a full-scale constitutional crisis. If Meghan were found guilty, his decision would be vindicated, and the monarchy would emerge stronger. But if she were somehow cleared, Charles would face accusations of destroying his own son's family without justification. It was a gamble, one that could either secure his legacy or haunt it. The public response revealed the depth of the divide. In Britain, many saw the decision as a long-overdue reckoning with Meghan and Harry's defiance. In America, however, sympathy for Meghan surged, with critics accusing the monarchy of cruelty and racism disguised as tradition. The scandal had become global, drawing in voices from politics, media, and entertainment. What began as whispers in palace corridors was now a debate on the world stage about truth, power, and the survival of monarchy in the modern age. King Charles's action marked a turning point in the story. No longer was this simply about Meghan's choices or Harry's silence. It was now about the crown itself, an institution forced to protect its very foundation by cutting ties with those it once embraced. The decision carried echoes of past royal crises, but it was unique in its scope and severity. This was not a scandal of personal failing, it was a scandal of succession. And in such matters, the monarchy could show no mercy. The chapter ends with the monarchy standing firm, Charles at the helm, and the world watching as Meghan faced not just scandal, but the consequences of her alleged deception. The storm had moved from whispers to evidence, from suspicion to decisive action. And now, it was about to move into its most dramatic stage yet, the arrest that would shock the globe. The announcement alone was enough to shake the world, but nothing compared to the day it actually happened, the day Meghan Markle was arrested. In that moment, a saga that had played out in whispers, headlines, and palace statements suddenly became real in the starkest way possible. Meghan, once introduced to the world as a symbol of progress and modernity within the royal family, now stood accused of a crime that cut to the very heart of monarchy itself. The arrest was not an impulsive act. It was the culmination of months of investigation. Behind the scenes, law enforcement officials and legal advisors had gathered enough evidence to move forward. The discrepancies in Archie and Lilibet's birth records had been corroborated by testimony, forensic analysis of signatures, and leaked communications that suggested deliberate manipulation. For authorities, the case was no longer about speculation, it was about law. For the monarchy, it was about survival. When the moment came, it was carried out with calculated precision. Early in the morning, as paparazzi lingered outside her California mansion, hoping for a glimpse of the Sussex family, unmarked cars arrived. Officers moved quietly, their steps measured but unrelenting. The world would soon see the photographs. Meghan escorted out of her home, her face a mix of defiance and disbelief, her hand raised not in a wave, but as though to block the cameras. For a woman who had carefully managed her image for years, the sight was devastating. News broke instantly. Major networks interrupted broadcasts with breaking news alerts. Social media exploded with disbelief. The hashtags trended globally within minutes, some celebrating what they called justice, others condemning the monarchy for what they saw as cruelty. The narrative was split in two, but no one could ignore the images flashing across screens. Meghan Markle, Duchess of Sussex, arrested for forgery. The royal family issued a brief but carefully worded statement. They emphasized their respect for the legal process while reiterating King Charles's earlier declaration: the integrity of the monarchy must remain beyond question. It was a statement designed to project calm and strength, but underneath, insiders revealed a very different picture. Within the palace, emotions were raw. For William, the arrest was both vindication and tragedy. For Anne, it was the necessary consequence of betrayal. For Charles, it was a father's heartbreak wrapped in a king's duty. Harry's reaction was perhaps the most heartbreaking of all. Reports suggested that he pleaded with authorities, begging them to reconsider, insisting Meghan was innocent. Witnesses described him looking distraught, pale, and unsteady as his wife was taken away. For a man who had promised to protect her against the world, to see her led away in handcuffs was unbearable. Yet the silence of the monarchy spoke volumes. There would be no intervention, no special treatment. Meghan was to face the same justice as anyone else accused of forgery. The arrest sent shockwaves not only through Britain and America, but across the globe. Commentators debated the implications. Legal experts explained the severity of document forgery, particularly when tied to royal succession. Political figures weighed in, some arguing that the monarchy had overreached, others insisting that no one, not even a duchess, should be above the law. The scandal was no longer confined to the royal family. It had become an international conversation about truth, power, and justice. For Meghan herself, the arrest was both humiliating and enraging. Insiders claimed she maintained her innocence fiercely, arguing that the accusations were fabricated by those who had always wanted to see her fail. Some described her as defiant, others as deeply shaken. But whatever her personal reaction, the world saw only the stark image of her being taken into custody. That single moment became the defining photograph of the scandal, one that would be etched into history. The climax of the legal storm was not a single piece of evidence, but the cumulative weight of it all. By the time closing arguments were delivered, the courtroom was heavy with the gravity of the moment. The prosecution declared that Meghan had tried to alter royal history, that her actions were a crime against both the law and the nation. The defense countered that she was being scapegoated, punished for daring to challenge the monarchy. The judge's gavel brought silence, but the echoes of those arguments reverberated across the globe. As the trial adjourned, the world waited for a verdict, torn between outrage and sympathy, justice and persecution. The legal storm had consumed everything: families, reputations, and institutions, and its aftermath would shape the monarchy's future. For Meghan, it was the fight of her life. For Harry, it was the test of his soul. And for the monarchy, it was the line it could never step back from. At the heart of the scandal, beyond the accusations, beyond the fury of the crown, beyond the debates in courtrooms and newsrooms, were two children whose very existence had become the most controversial subject in the world. Archie Harrison and Lilibet Diana, the children who should have represented the hope of a modern monarchy, instead became symbols of suspicion, secrecy, and shattered trust. The truth about Archie and Lilibet was not just about names on birth records. It was about innocence caught in the storm of ambition and deception. From the beginning, their lives were unlike any other royal children. Archie's birth was wrapped in mystery, his parents fiercely protective of their privacy. When the palace announced his arrival, the details were vague, and the absence of the traditional hospital photo call created ripples of doubt. Instead of the familiar image of proud parents standing on the steps of St. Mary's with their newborn, the world was handed carefully curated pictures days later. That single deviation from tradition sowed the seeds of speculation. Why hide what had always been celebrated openly? Lilibet's birth deepened the mystery. Taking place in California, far from the reach of British royal traditions, her arrival was accompanied by even fewer details. No medical staff stepped forward publicly, no clear photographs were provided, and the official documents raised questions from the start. To supporters, the secrecy was understandable. Harry and Meghan were protecting their children from a ruthless press. But to critics, it looked like the perfect cover for something much darker: the concealment of surrogacy and the manipulation of records to present an illusion. As investigations unfolded and testimony mounted, the narrative surrounding Archie and Lilibet shifted from curiosity to suspicion and then to devastating possibility. Forensic experts suggested that details on their documents had been altered after the fact. Witnesses hinted that the traditional processes of registering royal births had been bypassed. Journalists uncovered gaps in timelines, inconsistencies in Meghan's public appearances, and unusual delays in announcements. Piece by piece, the truth began to look far more complicated than the story the Sussexes had told the world. For the royal family, the implications were catastrophic. If Archie and Lilibet were not born in the way the records claimed, if surrogacy had indeed been concealed, then their legitimacy in the line of succession was void. Titles, positions, and recognition could not stand on falsified foundations. King Charles's earlier declaration that the Sussex line was illegitimate now loomed like a prophecy fulfilled. The crown could not allow history itself to be falsified, no matter how painful the consequences for two innocent children. The tragedy, of course, was that Archie and Lilibet bore no fault in any of this. They were children, unaware of the storm raging around them, unaware that their names had become headlines, that their innocence had been turned into a battlefield. The world debated their existence, their place in history, their future, without ever considering the human toll. For Harry, this was perhaps the cruelest blow of all. The family he had wanted so desperately to protect, the children he had sworn to shield from the fate of his mother, were now the most scrutinized, doubted, and debated figures in the monarchy. The public, too, could not escape the emotional weight of the truth about Archie and Lilibet. Some felt heartbreak, seeing the children as victims of adult ambition and betrayal. Others felt anger, convinced they had been misled by carefully staged images and words. In coffee shops, in living rooms, in parliaments and studios, the same questions echoed. Who are Archie and Lilibet in the eyes of history? Were they the heirs they were presented to be, or were they pawns in a deception that sought to rewrite the line of succession? The courtroom became the stage where these questions were most brutally dissected. Prosecutors emphasized that the integrity of royal succession cannot survive lies. Defense attorneys countered that the children were being unfairly targeted, that even if mistakes had been made, it was cruel and inhumane to punish them for it. Every argument, every testimony, carried with it the faces of two children whose futures were being decided without their voice. For the monarchy, however, the truth was unforgiving. Legitimacy is the cornerstone of royal power, and without it, the entire institution risks collapse. If Archie and Lilibet were born through surrogacy and their records had been falsified, then history demanded correction. The Sussex line would have to be erased from succession, no matter how painful, no matter how public. It was a decision that weighed heavily on Charles and William, but one they knew they could not avoid. For Meghan, the truth about Archie and Lilibet became both her greatest weapon and her greatest vulnerability. She insisted she was their mother, that the accusations were attacks designed to strip her children of their rightful place. Yet the more she spoke, the more the evidence stacked against her, painting a portrait of secrecy and manipulation that could not be ignored. The chapter closes with the realization that the truth about Archie and Lilibet is more than a question of documents. It is a question of trust, of history, of how far people are willing to go to protect or manipulate power. Two children stand at the center of a storm they never asked for, and their futures hang on the outcome of battles fought by adults who have already lost sight of innocence. Every person has a threshold, a point at which the weight of grief, betrayal, and impossible choices becomes too much to bear. For Prince Harry, that breaking point came in the aftermath of Meghan's arrest and the unraveling truth about Archie and Lilibet. For years, he had carried the burden of being both royal and rebel, both prince and husband. both brother and outcast. But as the evidence mounted and his family stood firmly against him, the pressure finally shattered the fragile walls he had built around himself. What followed was not just a crack in Harry's composure. It was a collapse that exposed the rawest, most human side of a man caught between love and duty. Harry had always defined himself by loyalty. Loyalty to his mother's memory, loyalty to the causes he believed in, and above all, loyalty to the woman he loved. That loyalty had carried him through years of attacks from the press, through his dramatic break from the monarchy, through his decision to uproot his life and move across the Atlantic. He had believed that standing by Meghan meant standing for truth, for independence, for freedom from the chains that had haunted him since childhood. But now, that loyalty was being tested by the one thing he could not escape: evidence. Every day in court, Harry sat silently beside Meghan, his hand often clenched around hers, his jaw tight, his eyes weary. Observers said he looked like a man haunted, his body present but his spirit torn. He listened as expert after expert testified, as inconsistencies were laid bare, as the children he adored became the focus of relentless scrutiny. For Harry, it was more than humiliation, it was heartbreak. To defend Meghan meant questioning the very foundation of his children's identities. To doubt her meant admitting he may have been deceived, not just as a prince, but as a husband and father. The breaking point came slowly, like a dam straining under too much water. In private, Harry was said to rage, at reporters, at palace officials, at his own family. He accused William of betrayal, Charles of cruelty, and of heartlessness. Yet behind the fury was a deep, unspoken grief. He began to withdraw, isolating himself in moments of despair, unable to reconcile the life he had chosen with the reality unfolding around him. Friends described him as restless, pacing late into the night, unable to sleep, haunted by visions of his children's futures being torn apart. The divide with William, already fractured, widened into a canyon. William, resolute in his support of Charles, saw Harry's silence as complicity. Harry, in turn, saw William's firmness as mercilessness. The two brothers, once inseparable in grief after their mother's death, now stood on opposite sides of history, their bond destroyed by choices neither could undo. It was said that in rare conversations between them, voices were raised, accusations hurled, tears shed. For Harry, losing his brother's trust was like losing a part of himself, but he could not abandon Meghan, not when she was fighting for her freedom. The emotional toll also bled into Harry's marriage. While he stood beside Meghan in public, insiders whispered of private confrontations, moments when he demanded answers, moments when his voice trembled with desperation. "Tell me the truth," he reportedly pleaded more than once, his love colliding with his need for clarity. Meghan's responses, whether defiant or tearful, only deepened his torment. Was she a victim of circumstance, or had she dragged him into a lie so vast it could never be forgiven? The questions tore at him until silence became his only refuge. Publicly, Harry's breaking point became visible in small but powerful ways. His speeches, once filled with passion, grew shorter, halting, often vague. His posture, once confident, slumped under invisible weight. Photographs captured him staring into the distance, his expression vacant, his body present but his mind elsewhere. To the public, it looked like guilt. To those who knew him, it looked like despair. The true collapse came when the reality of his children's fate was laid bare in court. To hear prosecutors argue that Archie and Lilibet should be stripped permanently of their positions in the line of succession was a cruelty he could not bear. His children, innocent and blameless, were now painted as illegitimate, their futures reduced to questions of law and bloodline. Harry, who had once promised Diana's legacy would live on through him, now faced the possibility that his own children's legacy might be erased. In that moment, something inside him broke. Reports suggested that Harry broke down in private chambers, sobbing uncontrollably, his body shaking under the weight of grief. Palace aides described him as inconsolable, repeating again and again that all he had ever wanted was to protect his family. For the first time, even those who saw him as complicit recognized the depth of his suffering. This was not a man plotting betrayal. This was a man drowning in consequences he could no longer control. The world watched Harry's breaking point with a mix of sympathy and suspicion. Some saw him as the tragic figure, caught in a web spun by others, a man who had sacrificed everything for love only to lose it all. Others saw him as weak, unable to stand up for truth, blinded by devotion to a woman accused of betraying the monarchy. No matter the interpretation, one fact was undeniable. Harry was no longer the defiant prince who had walked away from the crown. He was a broken man, struggling to hold on to his family, his dignity, and his sanity. The chapter closes with Harry at his most vulnerable, caught between the woman he loves, the children he adores, and the monarchy that will never forgive him. His breaking point is not an ending but a descent, a moment when the weight of scandal proves too much for even a prince to carry. And as the storm around him intensifies, the question remains, will he rise from the wreckage, or will this breaking point mark the end of the Harry the world once knew? The media frenzy surrounding her arrest was unprecedented. Helicopters hovered above the mansion, live feeds broadcast the scene in real time, and pundits filled airwaves with speculation. Every detail, the timing of the arrest, the expressions on Meghan's face, the absence of Harry's voice, was analyzed endlessly. It was not simply news, it was spectacle. But behind the spectacle was a sobering reality. Forgery is not a trivial crime, and when it involves royal birth records, the implications stretch far beyond personal guilt. If Meghan had indeed falsified documents, it meant she had attempted to alter the line of succession, to deceive not only the monarchy but the people it represents. That was not just a betrayal of family, it was a betrayal of history. As the day of the arrest came to a close, the world was left reeling. Supporters clung to the hope that Meghan would be vindicated, that the charges would collapse under scrutiny. Critics saw the arrest as confirmation of everything they had suspected from the start. For the monarchy, it was the fulfillment of Charles's decisive action, proof that the crown would not be tarnished by deception. And for Harry, it was the darkest moment of his life, the day love, loyalty, and truth collided in the most devastating way possible. The chapter of Meghan's arrest does not end with resolution. It ends with uncertainty, with a woman in custody, a family divided, and a monarchy bracing for the storm yet to come. The arrest was not the conclusion of the scandal. It was its most dramatic escalation, the moment when whispers became undeniable reality. Every family has its breaking point, and for the British royal family, Meghan's arrest shattered what little unity remained. To the public, it was shocking enough to see a duchess led away in handcuffs. But behind palace walls, the true devastation unfolded. The arrest was not only a scandal. It was a wound that cut deep into the bonds of blood and duty. The fallout within the family was raw, emotional, and unrelenting. The first and most immediate reaction came from Prince William. His anger, already simmering from years of tension with Harry and Meghan, now boiled over into something close to fury. William had always seen himself as the protector of the monarchy's future, a man whose duty was not only to his father, but to his country. To him, Meghan's actions were not simply personal failings. They were a direct assault on the institution he was born to defend. Insiders whispered that his words in private were harsh, accusing Harry of being complicit, of allowing his loyalty to Meghan to blind him to the damage she was inflicting. For William, this was not just scandal. It was betrayal of the highest order. Catherine, usually the calm and steady presence, was no less shaken. She had long been wary of Meghan, quietly uncomfortable with the way she had upended traditions and courted publicity. But this arrest confirmed every fear she had harbored. For a mother like Catherine, whose children's futures were tied to the legitimacy of the monarchy, Meghan's alleged forgery felt like a direct threat. The thought that Archie and Lilibet might have been fraudulently placed in the line of succession was, to her, intolerable. Reports suggested she was deeply protective, ensuring George, Charlotte, and Louis were shielded from the fallout, even as she quietly stood firmly at William's side in support of Charles's decisive action. Princess Anne, known for her bluntness and disdain for nonsense, was perhaps the most outspoken. She had never hidden her skepticism about Meghan, and the arrest confirmed her worst suspicions, according to palace staff, and made no attempt to soften her view. She believed Meghan had deliberately undermined the monarchy for personal gain, and she saw Harry's silence as weakness. For Anne, The fallout was not about hurt feelings, it was about survival. Her stance was simple. The monarchy must cut ties completely and permanently, no matter the personal cost. Queen Camilla's role in the fallout was more measured, but no less firm. Having lived through decades of public scorn herself, she knew the sting of scandal. But she also knew the importance of loyalty. To her, Meghan had crossed a line from which there was no return. Privately, she urged Charles to remain steadfast, to show the world that the monarchy could not and would not be undermined. For Camilla, the lesson of history was clear. Once trust is broken, the only path forward is strength. And then there was King Charles himself. As monarch, he had made the decision to sever ties, but as a father, the fallout left him deeply wounded. Watching his youngest son spiral in anguish while his eldest demanded firmness was an agony only he could understand. Charles had always wanted to be a unifying figure, to heal the divisions in his family. But now he faced the reality that no reconciliation was possible, not when the legitimacy of the monarchy itself was at stake. The personal pain was immense, but the king could not allow it to sway him. He knew the crown came before everything else. For Prince Harry, the fallout was devastating. His wife was under arrest, his brother condemned him, his father had stripped his children's recognition, and his sister-in-law and aunts saw him as complicit. The isolation was unbearable. Reports suggested he was torn between rage and despair, at times lashing out, at other times collapsing in private. Friends described him as lost, a man who had sacrificed everything for love only to find himself trapped in a nightmare. To Harry, it must have felt as though the family he had tried so desperately to protect from Meghan's critics had turned its back on him entirely. The fallout didn't stop with the immediate family. Extended royals, cousins, uncles, distant relations, voiced their own anger behind closed doors. Some felt relief that Meghan was finally facing consequences. Others worried about the damage the scandal inflicted on all of them. Family gatherings became tense, conversations clipped and formal, with an unspoken understanding that a line had been drawn. Those who stood with Charles and William found themselves openly opposing Harry, deepening a divide that may never heal. What made the fallout so profound was that it was not only emotional, but symbolic. The monarchy has always survived by presenting a united front, by projecting the image of family as nation. But now, that image was shattered. The arrest had exposed raw divisions, and the family's inability to reconcile those divisions played out on the world stage. Every glance, every silence, every carefully worded statement was dissected by the public, further amplifying the sense of collapse. Beyond the palace, the public reaction mirrored the family divide. Supporters of the monarchy rallied behind Charles and William, praising them for their firmness. Meghan's supporters, however, painted the family as cold, ruthless, and vindictive. The fallout was not just personal, it became political, cultural, and global. The royal family, once the world's symbol of continuity, now looked fractured, fragile, and divided. The chapter of fallout within the family ends not with healing, but with a widening gulf. Trust had been broken, loyalty tested, and love pushed to its limits. The monarchy had survived scandals before, but never one that questioned the very legitimacy of its bloodline. For Charles, the decision to act had preserved the crown. For the family, it had left wounds that may never close. And for Harry, it had left him in the loneliest place of all, caught between love and duty, family and betrayal, with no clear way forward. If Meghan's arrest had shaken the palace to its core, it sent the media world into a frenzy unlike anything seen in decades. The British monarchy has weathered countless storms under the glare of cameras, abdications, divorces, affairs, and tragedies, but this was different. This wasn't just scandal. This was crime, betrayal, and the suggestion that one of the most famous women in the world had forged history itself. Newsrooms knew instantly that this story would dominate headlines, and within minutes of her arrest, every channel, every paper, every digital platform across the globe was ablaze. The photographs became the defining image of the moment. Meghan, dressed casually in jeans and a sweater, being escorted by officers, her hand raised toward flashing cameras. The image was splashed across the front pages of newspapers from London to New York to Sydney. It was not a royal portrait, not a carefully staged photo shoot, but a candid capture of humiliation. For the monarchy's critics, it was proof that the institution had turned on Meghan. For her detractors, it was the validation they had waited for. The visual impact was undeniable. A duchess in handcuffs is a sight that shakes the very foundation of royal myth. Television networks scrambled to assemble panels of experts. Legal analysts explained the gravity of document forgery, especially when tied to succession. Royal historians compared the scandal to past crises, declaring that never before had the monarchy faced such a direct assault on legitimacy. Former palace staff were invited onto programs to share anecdotes, many hinting at the secrecy and irregularity that had long surrounded Meghan's pregnancies. Every clip, every comment, every facial expression was dissected, replayed, and debated endlessly. Social media was no less explosive. Hashtags trended globally within minutes, some calling for Meghan's freedom, others declaring her guilty before trial. Memes flooded Twitter and Instagram, some mocking the situation, others framing Meghan as a victim of royal cruelty. TikTok users pieced together conspiracy timelines, stitching together footage of Meghan's pregnancies, alleged baby bump slips, and now, the arrest. On both sides, the passion was ferocious. Meghan had always polarized the public, but now the divide felt like a global war of opinion. The outrage extended beyond gossip and memes. Politicians began weighing in. American lawmakers questioned whether Meghan was being targeted unfairly, suggesting the monarchy was silencing her for speaking out against racism and tradition. British MPs countered by arguing that no one, royal or otherwise, was above the law, and that the integrity of public records had to be defended. Editorials filled newspapers. Was Meghan a victim of a centuries-old institution protecting itself at all costs? Or was she a manipulator who had tried to deceive the world for her own gain? Amid the frenzy, public protests began to emerge. In London, small groups gathered outside Buckingham Palace, some holding signs condemning Meghan, others defending her. In California, her supporters rallied outside the Sussex home, chanting for her release and accusing the monarchy of orchestrating her downfall. The scandal had crossed from news into cultural warfare, becoming a battle of narratives in real time. The outrage was not only directed at Meghan. Harry faced intense criticism as well. Was he complicit? Did he know about the forged documents? Was his silence proof of guilt or of heartbreak? The press feasted on his absence from public statements, interpreting every photograph of him as a sign of despair, guilt, or denial. The once beloved prince, whose image had long been tied to Diana's tragic legacy, was now cast in a new light, either as a blind husband trapped by love or as a man who had betrayed the institution that raised him. And then there was the question of the children. Archie and Lilibet, innocent in all of this, became the most painful part of the scandal. Media outlets debated whether their titles should be revoked permanently, whether they would ever be accepted as part of the royal lineage again. Every discussion about them carried a heavy weight, reminding the world that while adults waged their wars of loyalty and deceit, two children's futures hung in the balance. The frenzy reached such heights that even those usually silent on royal matters began to speak. Celebrities who had once associated with Meghan distanced themselves, offering vague statements about trusting the legal process. Others, particularly in Hollywood, defended her, painting her as a woman attacked for daring to challenge tradition. The cultural divide grew deeper. In Britain, the story was framed largely as justice. In America, it was often framed as persecution. The contrast highlighted the global fascination with the monarchy and the deep cultural split in how it is perceived. Within days, the scandal consumed everything. Other news stories were drowned out. Every headline, every broadcast, every online debate circled back to Meghan's arrest. For the monarchy, this was both a curse and a necessity. The curse was the endless scrutiny, the relentless attention that exposed every weakness. The necessity was the chance to show the world that even those closest to the crown would face consequences if they betrayed it. The outrage, however, was not only directed outward. The monarchy itself faced sharp criticism. Commentators accused Charles and William of being ruthless, of sacrificing family for tradition. Others accused them of not acting soon enough, of allowing the situation to spiral until it became a global humiliation. No one was spared, and no narrative was uncontested. The frenzy consumed everyone. As this chapter closes, the picture is one of chaos. The media machine roared at full speed, spinning stories faster than the palace could respond. Outrage poured from every corner of the globe, fueled by images, speculation, and emotion. The scandal was no longer a private crisis. It was the world's obsession. And while the frenzy made Meghan's downfall more dramatic, it also ensured that the next stage, the legal battle, would unfold under the harshest spotlight imaginable. If Meghan's arrest had been the spark that ignited a global fire, the legal proceedings were the roaring inferno that followed. It is one thing to see a royal family member in handcuffs, but it is another entirely to watch them face the full weight of the law. This was no tabloid rumor or palace whisper anymore. This was a courtroom battle where every document, every witness, every piece of evidence was laid bare under oath. For Meghan Markle, the Duchess of Sussex, the legal storm was the most defining and devastating chapter of her life. From the very beginning, the severity of the charges was made clear. Document forgery in any context is a serious crime, but when the documents in question involve royal birth records, the implications extend far beyond personal fraud. Prosecutors argued that Meghan had not only attempted to deceive the public, but had tampered with history itself. If true, it meant she had tried to manipulate the very foundation upon which the monarchy rests, the bloodline. That accusation alone turned what could have been a private scandal into a matter of national, even constitutional, importance. The first court appearance was a spectacle. Crowds gathered outside, cameras lined every pavement, and journalists live-tweeted each development. Meghan appeared calm on the surface, her face composed but pale, her eyes betraying the strain she was under. Harry accompanied her, visibly tense, his silence speaking louder than any words. The judge emphasized the gravity of the case and the need for impartiality. Still, it was clear to everyone present that this was no ordinary trial. The fate of individuals, reputations, and institutions all hung in the balance. The evidence presented was painstakingly detailed. Forensic document experts testified about inconsistencies in the signatures on Archie's and Lilibet's birth records. Digital analysts revealed metadata suggesting documents had been altered after filing. Palace insiders took the stand, some reluctantly, admitting they had noticed irregularities but had been pressured to remain quiet. Piece by piece, a picture was painted of a deliberate effort to manipulate the truth. For Meghan, every shred of evidence chipped away at her credibility. For the public, it was confirmation of the suspicions they had carried for years. The defense, however, was equally determined. Meghan's legal team argued that the discrepancies were clerical errors, the kind that happen in bureaucracies all the time. They painted her as a victim of relentless scrutiny, targeted unfairly because of her race, her background, and her outspokenness against the monarchy. They pointed to her history of being vilified by the press, suggesting the charges were part of a broader campaign to silence her. The courtroom became not only a battle over documents, but over narratives. Was Meghan a criminal, or was she a victim of a centuries-old institution unwilling to accept her? The tension was unbearable. Each day brought new revelations, new headlines, and new divisions in public opinion. Supporters of Meghan rallied online, calling the trial a witch hunt. Critics pointed to the evidence and declared her guilty before the judge even spoke. For Harry, each session in court was torture. He sat beside Meghan, visibly conflicted, caught between his loyalty to her and the undeniable weight of the evidence. Observers whispered about his expression, sometimes furious, sometimes broken, always haunted. The monarchy itself loomed over the proceedings. Though Charles, William, and other senior royals did not testify, their presence was felt in every corner of the courtroom. The prosecution repeatedly emphasized the importance of protecting the monarchy's integrity, while the defense accused the crown of exerting invisible pressure to ensure Meghan's downfall. The trial was not only about Meghan. It was about the monarchy's credibility, its power, and its survival. What made the legal storm so gripping was that it blurred the lines between law and legacy. It was not simply about whether a law had been broken, but about what that meant for the future. If Meghan was guilty, it confirmed the worst suspicions and vindicated Charles's decision to strip Archie and little bit of legitimacy. If she was innocent, it meant the monarchy had destroyed her life unjustly, fueling calls for accountability and reform. There was no outcome that did not carry monumental consequences. Outside the courtroom, the frenzy continued. Protesters gathered daily, some holding signs declaring Meghan a fraud, others calling her a victim. News outlets dissected every moment, from Meghan's outfits to Harry's silence, from the judge's tone to the jurors' expressions. Every detail became a story, every word became a headline. The trial was not just a legal battle. It was the world's most watched performance of truth and deception. Inside, the storm only grew stronger. Witness after witness testified, each adding layers to the complex narrative. A former palace aide revealed that they had been instructed to file documents without asking questions. A hospital staff member admitted the official protocols had been bypassed. Each revelation tightened the noose around Meghan's defense, leaving her team scrambling to reframe the story. And yet, despite the mounting evidence, Meghan remained composed, never admitting guilt, always insisting she was being framed. When a scandal erupts within the British royal family, the reverberations never stay confined to the walls of Buckingham Palace. The monarchy is not just a British institution. It is a global symbol, a centuries-old brand watched by millions across every continent. Meghan Markle's arrest and the declaration of the Sussex line's illegitimacy did not remain a domestic issue. It ignited international shockwaves. Governments, media, celebrities, and ordinary citizens all weighed in, and the reactions painted a divided, often volatile picture of how the world saw both Meghan and the monarchy. In the United States, the reaction was immediate and emotional. To many Americans, Meghan had always been one of their own, a California-born actress who had married into royalty and faced what they saw as relentless bullying by the British establishment. Her arrest was framed by some as the monarchy's revenge, a calculated effort to silence a woman who had dared to challenge their traditions. Networks like CNN and MSNBC dedicated entire segments to debates on whether Meghan was being persecuted. Commentators argued that this was less about forged documents and more about punishing a woman who had spoken openly about race, mental health, and her struggle against a rigid institution. Celebrities added their voices, with some defending Meghan as a victim of systemic cruelty while others, wary of association, distanced themselves quietly. In Britain, however, the tone was starkly different. British media, long critical of Meghan, treated the arrest as vindication. Tabloids splashed triumphant headlines, framing the scandal as proof that the monarchy had been right to distrust her. Public opinion polls revealed a surge in support for King Charles and Prince William, with many praising their firmness in protecting the crown. Talk shows filled with voices declaring that the monarchy had dodged catastrophe, that Meghan's alleged deception could have destroyed the institution if it had gone unchecked. Yet even within Britain, there were divisions. Progressive commentators cautioned that the monarchy risked appearing ruthless, that punishing Meghan so severely could backfire by fueling sympathy among younger generations. Across Europe, reactions were mixed. In France and Germany, newspapers reported on the scandal with a tone of disbelief, emphasizing how unprecedented it was for a royal to face criminal charges. Some commentators framed it as evidence of the monarchy's fragility, a sign that the crown was out of step with modern values. In Spain and the Netherlands, where monarchies still exist, comparisons were drawn between Charles's decisive action and the ways their own royal families might respond to similar crises. The consensus was clear. The scandal had weakened the global image of royalty, even if Charles's firmness had preserved its legitimacy in Britain. In Commonwealth nations, the reaction carried an even heavier weight. Canada, Australia, and New Zealand have long wrestled with the question of whether to maintain the monarchy. Meghan's scandal reignited those debates. In Canada, where Harry and Meghan had briefly lived, newspapers asked whether the monarchy's treatment of them proved that it was time to cut ties with the crown entirely. In Australia, Republican voices grew louder, declaring that the scandal was proof the monarchy was outdated and irreparably tainted. The legal battle over birth records in Britain seemed far away, but its implications reached deep into countries still tethered to the royal institution. The international outrage also played out on the streets. In Washington, small rallies formed in front of the British Embassy, with Meghan's supporters carrying signs that read, "Justice for Meghan" and "End royal cruelty." In London, counter-protests appeared outside Buckingham Palace, with banners demanding "Protect the Crown" and "No forgery" in the line of succession. Around the world, the monarchy had become not just a subject of fascination, but a symbol of larger battles: race, tradition, gender, power, and modern identity. Social media amplified every reaction, fueling cultural wars across borders. In the US, hashtags painted Meghan as a victim of monarchy oppression. In Britain, hashtags declared the Sussexes frauds. Influencers and commentators gained millions of views dissecting every photograph, every court document, every royal statement. The digital divide mirrored the real one. Meghan as martyr in some eyes, Meghan as manipulator in others. Governments, too, were forced to comment. American officials, cautious not to intervene in Britain's internal matters, issued statements emphasizing the importance of due process and fair treatment. Some British MPs welcomed the firmness of the monarchy, while others worried about the political fallout of alienating younger, more diverse citizens sympathetic to Meghan. Diplomats quietly admitted that the scandal complicated relations, especially with nations where Republican sentiment was already strong. The Vatican, in a rare move, issued a statement about the importance of truth and transparency in all institutions, a thinly veiled commentary on the scandal. Leaders in Africa and the Caribbean, where Meghan's biracial heritage had once been celebrated as a sign of progress for the monarchy, expressed disappointment. Some saw the scandal as the final straw, proof that the monarchy would never change, that inclusion had been a facade. Perhaps the most striking reaction came from ordinary people who had once celebrated Meghan and Harry as a love story for the modern age. Across continents, people expressed feelings of betrayal, confusion, or sympathy. For some, the arrest confirmed their suspicions all along, that Meghan was not the fairy tale princess she pretended to be. For others, it confirmed their belief that the monarchy would destroy anyone who challenged it. Either way, the dream of Meghan and Harry as symbols of progress was gone, replaced by bitterness, scandal, and division. The international reaction made one truth clear: the scandal was no longer just about Meghan or even the monarchy. It had become a mirror through which nations, cultures, and individuals projected their own battles with tradition, justice, and identity. In America, it was about race and independence. In Britain, it was about tradition and survival. In the Commonwealth, it was about whether ties to the crown still mattered in a modern world. The chapter closes with the world divided, the monarchy's image fractured across continents, and Meghan herself at the center of a storm larger than any one woman could control. The scandal had crossed every border, raising questions that reached far beyond Archie, Lilibet, or forged documents. It was no longer just about a duchess in disgrace. It was about what the monarchy itself meant to the world in the 21st century. The arrest of Meghan Markle and the declaration of the Sussex line as illegitimate was more than a sensational scandal. It was a moment that threatened to redefine the very nature of the modern British monarchy. The institution, centuries old, had survived wars, revolutions, and countless personal scandals, but now it faced a crisis not of lineage, nor even of power, but of perception. In an era of instant information, global scrutiny, and shifting cultural values, the monarchy could no longer rely on secrecy, tradition, or unquestioned reverence to maintain its legitimacy. King Charles's decisive actions against Meghan were framed domestically as necessary to protect the institution, but internationally, they highlighted a new reality. The monarchy must now operate in a world where transparency, accountability, and moral authority are constantly being judged. By enforcing the rule of law against a member of the royal family, Charles signaled a willingness to adapt, to embrace accountability, but in doing so, he also exposed the monarchy to unprecedented public scrutiny. Each statement, each legal filing, each public appearance carried with it the weight of a global audience, eager to interpret the royal family's every move through the lens of justice, tradition, or scandal. This redefinition was not purely external. Internally, the royal family faced a reckoning. Younger members, already accustomed to social media, public opinion, and celebrity culture watched closely. The actions taken against Meghan sent a clear message. Even in an age of modernity, the monarchy's values, lineage, discretion, and loyalty remain paramount. But at the same time, the event sparked internal debates about the future. How could the monarchy reconcile centuries-old traditions with the demands of a 21st-century public? How would they balance compassion with accountability, image with integrity? These were questions that had no easy answers. Analysts and historians began comparing the current moment to past crises. The abdication of Edward VIII in 1936 had challenged the monarchy's authority, yet it had been contained through strict control of media and messaging. The scandals of Princess Diana had exposed vulnerabilities, but the public had largely remained loyal to the institution. Meghan's arrest, however, represented a fundamentally different challenge. The story was not confined to print newspapers or evening broadcasts. It was global, instantaneous, and permanent. Digital archives, social media discourse, and viral videos ensured that every action and every accusation would be remembered, debated, and repurposed indefinitely. The monarchy's response needed to be strategic and nuanced. Legal teams coordinated with public relations experts, historians, and advisors to craft a narrative that would protect the institution while asserting the seriousness of the Sussex scandal. Statements emphasized the rule of law, the importance of integrity, and the Crown's commitment to preserving the lineage and values of the royal family. But beneath the formal statements, there was a deeper shift. The monarchy recognized that it could no longer act solely as a symbol of tradition. It must now also be perceived as a model of ethical conduct, transparency, and accountability. Public ceremonies, once purely ceremonial, began to take on new significance. Every royal appearance, every charitable engagement, every public speech was now an opportunity to reinforce trust and credibility. The monarchy increasingly sought to demonstrate relevance by highlighting social causes, engaging with diverse communities, and showing compassion alongside authority. In effect, the institution began to redefine itself as both traditional and contemporary, a custodian of history, but also a participant in modern societal values. Yet not all reactions were supportive. Critics argued that the monarchy's actions against Meghan reflected an inflexibility that risked alienating younger audiences. They suggested that strict enforcement of tradition could clash with evolving norms around family, race, and gender. Scholars debated whether the institution's survival depended on adaptation or whether it was destined to shrink into ceremonial symbolism, losing the public trust that had long legitimized its power. Within this broader context, Prince William and other senior royals played a critical role. Their actions and statements underscored continuity and stability, demonstrating a commitment to the monarchy's core principles even as they navigated unprecedented scrutiny. William's careful public appearances, measured speeches, and strategic engagements reinforced the idea that while individual members might falter, the institution itself remained resilient. The monarchy was showing that it could enforce standards without collapsing under scandal. The scandal also prompted reflection on the monarchy's future succession plans. With the Sussex line declared illegitimate, attention turned squarely to the Cambridge children and their roles in a modernized royal hierarchy. This shift reshaped public understanding of royal duty, responsibility, and expectation. The younger generation, long viewed as a symbol of hope and modernity, became central to the monarchy's projected stability. Their education, public engagement, and visibility were now seen not merely as family development, but as strategic investment in the Crown's ongoing legitimacy. The arrest of Meghan and the surrounding controversies also encouraged the monarchy to embrace a more proactive approach to reputation management. By anticipating potential scandals, maintaining open channels with media outlets, and cultivating narratives that reinforced both tradition and moral authority, the royal family demonstrated a strategic evolution. They were no longer passive figures at the mercy of gossip or public opinion. They were active participants in shaping perception, guided by lessons learned from Meghan's scandal and prior crises. Ultimately, the episode forced a profound internal and external rethinking. The monarchy recognized that survival depended not just on historical continuity, but on relevance, adaptability, and ethical conduct. The institution's identity was being redefined in real time, balancing the weight of centuries with the demands of a world in which information traveled instantly and public judgment was immediate. In a sense, Meghan Markle's arrest, while devastating for the individual and sensational for the public, became a catalyst for transformation, a turning point that compelled the monarchy to confront its vulnerabilities and evolve. The chapter closes with the image of a royal family simultaneously anchored in tradition and looking forward, aware that its legitimacy depended on both honoring history and adapting to the ethical expectations of the modern world. It is a delicate balance, one made more urgent by the global fallout from Meghan's scandal. The monarchy was no longer just a relic of the past. It was an institution actively redefining itself, learning from crisis, and seeking to maintain its authority in an era where transparency, morality, and public perception are as critical as lineage and ceremony. The fallout from Meghan Markle's arrest and the official declaration of the Sussex line as illegitimate cast a long shadow over the royal family, but it also set the stage for a reckoning with the future. Questions that had once lingered in whispers about succession, family loyalty, and public perception now demanded answers. What would happen to Archie and Lilibet? How would Prince Harry respond? And, perhaps most importantly, how would the royal family navigate a world in which the scandals surrounding the Sussexes could not be ignored or sanitized? At the heart of the matter was the legacy of the Sussex line. Once heralded as a bridge between the monarchy and modern celebrity culture, Harry and Meghan's influence had grown exponentially through social media, streaming deals, and global media appearances. Their voices were amplified in a way no previous royals had experienced, giving them unprecedented reach and, consequently, unprecedented power. Yet with that power came scrutiny, and when allegations of falsified birth records surfaced, the fragile veneer of public admiration quickly fractured. Suddenly, the Sussexes' global platform was both a weapon and a liability. Prince Harry's response to these developments was intensely personal. Known for his emotional transparency in interviews and public statements, he found himself at a crossroads. On one hand, there was the instinct to protect his family at all costs, to shield Archie and Lilibet from public judgment and legal consequence. On the other, there was an unavoidable confrontation with the reality of their compromised position within the royal hierarchy. His usual outlets, media interviews, personal statements, charitable initiatives, were suddenly constrained by legal and reputational limitations. The very tools he had used to shape his public image now served as reminders of his family's precarious situation. For the monarchy, the challenge was strategic. The declaration of illegitimacy was a necessary step to uphold the sanctity of the royal lineage, but it carried consequences beyond public perception. Protocols had to be rewritten, ceremonial roles reassigned, and official documents updated. Every action taken by the family, from public appearances to charitable work, was now scrutinized for alignment with this new framework. The monarchy had to demonstrate that it could act decisively without succumbing to sensationalism, a balancing act that required careful orchestration behind the scenes. Archie and Lilibet's position became a particularly delicate subject. Questions of custody, public appearances, and long-term education were no longer matters of private family decisions. They had become national and international concerns. Advisors debated whether limiting the children's exposure was the best strategy or whether carefully managed public engagements could rehabilitate their image and integrate them into a revised royal structure. Each decision was fraught with risk, as even minor missteps could reignite scandal or invite criticism from global audiences attuned to every nuance of royal conduct. Meanwhile, the media frenzy surrounding Meghan's arrest had created a feedback loop that could not easily be broken. Headlines, viral clips, and social media commentary ensured that the story remained alive in public consciousness. Every statement, denial, or acknowledgement from the royal family or the Sussex camp was dissected, shared, and reinterpreted. The monarchy had to navigate this information ecosystem with precision, balancing transparency with restraint. The stakes were high. Public trust, institutional credibility, and the future of the Sussex legacy were all intertwined in a complex web of perception and reality. Legal experts weighed in, noting that the declaration of illegitimacy was unprecedented in modern royal history. It set a legal and symbolic precedent, signaling that no member of the family, regardless of title or marriage, was above scrutiny or consequence. This action resonated beyond the palace walls, reinforcing the principle that accountability extended even to the highest echelons of society. For historians and constitutional scholars, the episode would be studied for decades as a turning point in the evolution of the monarchy, a moment when tradition, law, and public expectation collided with dramatic intensity. Prince Harry faced a particularly personal dilemma. While his public persona was often framed as rebellious yet principled, he now had to contend with the reality of a legacy compromised by the actions of someone he trusted implicitly. The emotional strain of managing public scrutiny, legal ramifications, and familial tensions was immense. Sources close to him reported late-night strategy sessions, confidential meetings with advisors, and private family consultations aimed at charting a path forward. Each choice carried the weight of history, morality, and personal consequence, forcing him to navigate a labyrinth of ethical and emotional complexity. The monarchy's approach to managing the Sussex legacy also involved careful orchestration of symbolism. Public ceremonies, charitable initiatives, and official statements were calibrated to reinforce continuity, stability, and moral authority. By demonstrating that the crown could uphold its standards without overreaching or acting vindicatively, the family aimed to restore confidence among the public while reaffirming the values that had long underpinned its legitimacy. Every move was designed to signal that, while individual members could falter, the institution itself remained unshakable. At the same time, international perspectives played a crucial role. Royal watchers, political analysts, and global media outlets were closely examining the implications of the Sussex scandal. How other monarchies, governments, and international observers interpreted these events could influence diplomatic relations, media narratives, and public perception. The British monarchy, already a symbol of soft power, now faced the challenge of projecting authority and stability while addressing deeply personal and controversial matters. Ultimately, the future of the Sussex legacy hinged on a delicate balance between accountability, compassion, and public perception. Meghan's actions had irrevocably altered the trajectory of the family, but the monarchy's response demonstrated that crisis could also catalyze adaptation and resilience. By confronting the scandal decisively, the royal family reinforced its authority, preserved its values, and created a framework for integrating future generations into a redefined royal structure. As the dust settled, the story of the Sussexes became a cautionary tale. A dramatic illustration of the consequences of deception, the fragility of reputation, and the enduring importance of lineage and duty. Yet it also offered insight into the monarchy's capacity for adaptation. In a world where transparency, public scrutiny, and ethical accountability are increasingly paramount, the royal family had shown that it could navigate scandal, protect its legacy, and redefine the principles that guide its continued relevance. The chapter closes with an image of the royal family looking toward the future with a renewed sense of purpose and vigilance. The Sussex legacy, while tarnished and complicated, had sparked a re-evaluation of values, protocols, and public engagement. For historians, observers, and the global audience, this moment would remain a defining episode in the story of the British monarchy, a testament to the interplay of personal choices, institutional response, and the enduring tension between tradition and modernity. The arrest of Meghan Markle and the official declaration of the Sussex line as illegitimate marked a turning point in royal history, one that would reverberate for decades. The scandal exposed not only personal choices and familial betrayal, but also the fragile balance between public expectation, private life, and institutional duty. It revealed that even the most celebrated figures were not immune to consequences, and that actions taken in secrecy could eventually unravel with dramatic intensity. As the world watched, reactions were polarized. Supporters of Meghan and Harry questioned the fairness of the royal response, framing it as a continuation of media persecution and institutional rigidity. Critics, however, saw the events as a long-overdue assertion of accountability, affirming that deception and criminal activity could not be excused, regardless of status. This dichotomy highlighted the complexity of public sentiment. Loyalty, skepticism, and fascination intertwined in ways that no official statement could fully control. For King Charles and the monarchy, the episode reinforced the importance of decisiveness and moral clarity. By acting swiftly to address the forgery of birth records and redefine the Sussex legacy, the royal family demonstrated its commitment to upholding the integrity of the institution. The careful balance between enforcing rules and maintaining compassion ensured that the monarchy could preserve both its authority and its image in the eyes of the public. The declaration of illegitimacy was not merely punitive. It was a reaffirmation of the principles that underpin the monarchy itself, a signal that no member, regardless of celebrity or influence, could undermine its foundations. Prince Harry faced the profound challenge of reconciling his love for his family with the reality of their compromised position. The fallout forced him to reconsider his role within the monarchy, the limits of loyalty, and the ways in which personal decisions intersected with institutional expectations. While the arrest and declaration were deeply painful, they also opened a path toward reflection, accountability, and potential reconciliation. Harry's future actions, whether in public life, charitable work, or personal endeavors, would be shaped by the lessons of this extraordinary period. Archie and Lilibet, the youngest members of the Sussex line, became the living symbols of the scandal. Their lives, forever altered by the choices of their parents, now required careful guidance to navigate a world of scrutiny, expectation, and historical significance. The monarchy and advisors faced the delicate task of ensuring their welfare, privacy, and education while simultaneously managing public perception. Every decision regarding their upbringing, appearances, and engagement with royal duties became an exercise in strategy, compassion, and foresight. The broader implications of the scandal extended beyond the royal family. It prompted discussions about accountability, the role of the media, and the ethical responsibilities of public figures. Scholars and commentators debated the legal, moral, and social consequences, examining how personal ambition, secrecy, and deception intersected with public duty. The episode became a case study in crisis management, institutional response, and the enduring tension between individual freedom and societal expectation. Ultimately, the story of Meghan Markle and the Sussex legacy served as a stark reminder of the consequences of deception and the imperatives of truth. It illuminated the fragility of reputation, the weight of family legacy, and the resilience required to navigate public scrutiny. While the scandal caused immediate turmoil, it also offered an opportunity for renewal, reflection, and the reinforcement of values that define the monarchy. The royal family, by confronting the crisis decisively, signaled that tradition, accountability, and transparency are not mutually exclusive. They demonstrated that even in the face of betrayal, it is possible to uphold dignity, enforce rules, and protect future generations. The Sussex saga, with all its drama, emotion, and controversy, ultimately reaffirmed the enduring relevance of the monarchy and its capacity to adapt to an ever-changing world. As the dust settles, viewers and historians alike are left with a profound reflection on the intersection of power, trust, and responsibility. The arrest of Meghan Markle and the official declaration of illegitimacy for Archie and Lilibet are more than a scandal. They are a cautionary tale, a defining moment, and a lesson in the consequences of choices made behind closed doors. The monarchy, resilient and resolute, moves forward with clarity, ensuring that the legacy of the past informs the path toward a stable and principled future. The story closes as it began, with the world watching, questioning, and reflecting on what it truly means to be royal, accountable, and human. The scandal may have shaken the foundations, but it also underscored the enduring strength of an institution that has weathered centuries of change, challenge, and controversy. For Meghan Markle, Prince Harry, and the youngest members of the Sussex line, the path ahead is uncertain, but the lessons of this chapter are indelibly etched into the annals of royal history. Beyond the immediate shock of the arrests and royal decrees, the ripple effects of Meghan Markle's actions reached into every corner of society fascinated by the monarchy. Media outlets, political commentators, and social media users dissected every facet of the scandal, from legal interpretations of the forged documents to the emotional toll on the royal family. It became more than a story of personal betrayal. It was a global conversation about ethics, transparency, and the delicate balance between privilege and responsibility. Legal experts weighed in on the unprecedented nature of the case, noting that forgery within royal circles is virtually unheard of in modern history. The act of falsifying birth records for Archie and Lilibet was not just a technical crime. It was a symbolic breach of trust, challenging centuries of royal protocol and societal expectation. Law enforcement, guided by both statutory regulations and public pressure, acted decisively, reinforcing the principle that no individual, regardless of fame or status, is above the law. Public opinion, predictably, was divided. Supporters of Meghan framed her actions within the context of systemic scrutiny and invasive media coverage, suggesting that intense pressure and constant public observation may have influenced her choices. Others viewed the situation through a lens of accountability, asserting that the sanctity of legal documents, especially concerning lineage and succession, could not be compromised. Debates raged across talk shows, newspapers, and online forums, demonstrating the deep fascination and emotional investment people have in the personal lives of the royals. For King Charles, the resolution of this crisis was both personal and institutional. He was tasked with balancing his duty to enforce the rules of the monarchy with the complex emotions involved in disciplining family members he has known and nurtured all his life. Declaring the Sussex line illegitimate was not a decision made lightly. It was a careful assertion of principle designed to preserve the integrity of the monarchy for future generations. Every statement, every legal move, and every public gesture was calculated to maintain stability, demonstrate moral authority, and set a precedent that could guide the royal family in years to come. Prince William and other senior royals faced their own challenges in the aftermath. As custodians of the monarchy's reputation and stewards of its future, they needed to ensure that the scandal did not overshadow their ongoing work, responsibilities, and public duties. Their response combined firmness with dignity, reinforcing the idea that the monarchy, while human, remains an institution governed by rules, ethics, and long-standing traditions. Emotional resilience, strategic communication, and careful public engagement became critical tools in navigating this period of heightened scrutiny. Meanwhile, the broader societal implications of the scandal began to take shape. Discussions about the responsibilities of public figures, the ethical use of power, and the consequences of deception became central to public discourse. Academic circles examined the case as a moment of historical significance, exploring how personal choices intersect with institutional stability and what lessons could be drawn about leadership, accountability, and trust in positions of influence. Psychologists and sociologists delved into the dynamics of fame, privilege, and pressure, offering perspectives on why individuals might engage in risky or deceptive behavior even under intense surveillance and expectation. For Harry, Meghan, and their children, the path forward was irrevocably altered. Every public appearance, every statement, and every personal decision would be weighed against the backdrop of the scandal. The young lives of Archie and Lilibet were now entwined with historical scrutiny, and their experiences would be shaped by a narrative larger than themselves. Protective measures, careful management of their upbringing, and strategic guidance became essential, ensuring their well-being while maintaining transparency with the public and adherence to royal protocols. As the monarchy navigated this period, lessons about accountability, ethics, and the consequences of hidden actions became clear. The Sussex saga underscored that even private decisions, when intertwined with public roles, carry profound implications. It highlighted the fragile balance between personal desire and institutional duty, revealing that every choice carries weight beyond the immediate moment. The narrative of deception and revelation served as both a cautionary tale and a study in resilience, emphasizing that institutions endure not only through tradition, but through the steadfast enforcement of principles and values. The global fascination with the story demonstrated the enduring allure of the monarchy as both a symbol and a family. People were captivated not merely by scandal, but by the interplay of emotion, power, and consequence. The arrest and declaration of illegitimacy became emblematic of the tension between modern scrutiny and historical privilege, illustrating that transparency, truth, and accountability are essential components of any enduring institution. In the end, the royal family emerged as both human and principled, navigating heartbreak, betrayal, and public attention with a combination of emotional strength and institutional clarity. For Meghan Markle, the consequences were severe, affecting personal freedom, reputation, and familial relationships. For the monarchy, the crisis reinforced its capacity to respond decisively, maintain credibility, and protect future generations while preserving a centuries-old legacy. The story leaves the audience reflecting on the nature of trust, responsibility, and the cost of deception. It emphasizes that while the allure of power and status may tempt some to act outside the bounds of integrity, the principles governing institutions, families, and society remain steadfast. Every choice has a consequence, and the unfolding of events surrounding the Sussex family serves as a dramatic reminder of this enduring truth. Even as the cameras stop rolling and headlines fade, the lessons from this saga linger. Meghan Markle's arrest and the declaration of Archie and Lilibet as illegitimate is more than a tabloid spectacle. It is a story about human ambition, ethical boundaries, and the weight of choices under the gaze of the world. It prompts us to ask difficult questions. How far would someone go to protect an image, a narrative, or a future they desperately desire? What are the limits of loyalty when ambition collides with integrity? And, perhaps most importantly, how do institutions endure when those within them act against the rules that bind everyone else? The reverberations continue across the globe. Fans of the monarchy, legal scholars, social commentators, and everyday observers are all compelled to confront the intersection of celebrity, power, and accountability. For some, it is a cautionary tale, a reminder that wealth, fame, or proximity to history does not grant immunity from consequences. For others, it is a drama of human frailty, where emotions, personal decisions, and private ambitions collide with centuries of protocol and public expectation. Public discourse evolves, with analysts drawing parallels between this scandal and historical events, showing that while the stakes of modern media amplify visibility, the essential human themes, trust, deception, family loyalty, remain constant. The monarchy, often seen as an untouchable symbol, is revealed in its dual nature, venerable yet human, majestic yet vulnerable. This dichotomy is what captivates the world, what makes stories like this resonate far beyond palace walls. For the young heirs, Archie and Lilibet, the future is uncertain but guided by a framework of protection and prudence. The royal family's actions, while harsh, are designed to safeguard both the integrity of the institution and the welfare of its youngest members. Behind the headlines, every legal move, every public statement, and every private gesture reflects careful consideration of legacy, morality, and the pressures of public life. Their upbringing, while scrutinized by millions, will continue under the watchful eyes of those who prioritize stability, education, and emotional well-being. In reflecting on this saga, it is clear that the story transcends the individual. It is a narrative about the collision of personal desire and institutional responsibility, a vivid example of how actions ripple far beyond their immediate context. The arrest of Meghan Markle, the revocation of her children's legitimacy, and the royal family's response form a compelling tapestry of consequence, emotion, and history. It illustrates that even in a world dominated by fame and power, principles endure, actions have meaning, and accountability is unavoidable. Ultimately, this story is a mirror for all of us, reflecting the enduring tension between ambition and ethics, desire and duty, secrecy and transparency. It challenges viewers to consider their own choices, the influence of external pressures, and the boundaries they set for themselves in pursuit of personal goals. The royal family's handling of the scandal demonstrates that while mistakes may be made, institutions are resilient when guided by clear values and decisive action. As the public digests the fallout, debates continue. Could history have unfolded differently? Could better decisions have prevented the scandal? How will the monarchy evolve in response to modern scrutiny and global fascination? These questions keep the story alive, ensuring that the events surrounding Meghan Markle, Archie, Lilibet, and the royal family remain a reference point for understanding power, responsibility, and the human condition. In conclusion, the saga serves as a dramatic reminder that no matter the allure of privilege or the intensity of personal ambition, truth and integrity remain fundamental. The arrest, the legal consequences, and the royal decrees are all part of a broader narrative that underscores the enduring importance of accountability. The story closes not merely as a scandal, but as a timeless lesson in ethics, legacy, and the consequences of our choices. The royal world is in total shock. Meghan Markle, the Duchess of Sussex, has been arrested following explosive revelations about falsified birth records for Archie and Lilibet. Evidence confirming suspicions of surrogacy and deception has forced the royal family to make an unprecedented move, declaring the Sussex line illegitimate. In this video, we dive deep into the scandal that's shaking the monarchy to its core. From secret documents and shocking revelations to the royal family's swift and decisive response, every detail is laid bare. What led Meghan to take such drastic measures? How did the palace uncover the truth? And what does this mean for the future of Archie, Lilibet, and the royal family's legacy? Watch as we unpack the drama, explore the emotional fallout, and reveal the reactions from royal insiders and global audiences alike. This isn't just a scandal. It's a story of ambition, betrayal, and consequences that will echo through history. Don't miss a moment of this jaw-dropping exposé. Stay tuned till the end as we uncover the full timeline, shocking evidence, and the ripple effects that will change the royal family forever. Comment below. What do you think of Meghan Markle's arrest and the royal family's response? Could this have been avoided, or was it inevitable?